My parents sold our family estate for millions, gifting my idle brother a luxury penthouse while leaving me a worthless, muddy lot. They thought they were teaching me a lesson in independence, but they didn't realize that mud was actually a goldmine. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Kin and Karma. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The text message from my mother, Maria, had been brief, almost clinical. Dinner at 7:00. The Ritz. Wear something nice. Big news. I stared at the screen, my eyes burning from staring at zoning maps and city grid layouts for the last 10 hours. I was sitting in my small, rented cubicle of an office at the city planning department, nursing a lukewarm coffee that tasted mostly of cardboard. My stomach gave a familiar, anxious lurch. Big news in my family usually meant one of two things. My brother Henry was in trouble again and needed a bailout, or my parents had decided to go on another 3-month cruise and needed me to house-sit their poodles. I was 32 years old, an urban planner for the city, and I was exhausted. I had just come off a bout of the flu that had lingered for 2 weeks, leaving me physically drained and thinner than I liked. My blazer felt loose around my shoulders as I gathered my things. "You okay, Emily?" my colleague Sarah asked, pausing by my desk. "You look a little pale." "Just family stuff," I managed a weak smile. "Dinner with the parents." "Good luck," she grimaced sympathetically. She knew enough about Christopher and Maria to know that luck was exactly what I needed. I arrived at the restaurant 5 minutes early, but they were already seated. My father, Christopher, looked every inch the retired corporate executive, silver hair perfectly coiffed, a suit that cost more than my car, and an expression of perpetual dissatisfaction. My mother, Maria, was busy adjusting the silverware, her diamond bracelets clinking softly. And there was Henry. Henry, my 28-year-old brother, was grinning. That was the first warning sign. Henry never grinned unless he had just gotten away with something or was about to receive something he didn't deserve. He was wearing a velvet jacket that was too trendy for the venue and sipping a scotch that was definitely top shelf. "Emily, you made it," my father boomed, his voice carrying just a little too far, ensuring the other diners noticed us. "You look tired. Are you eating enough?" "I'm fine, Dad. Just recovering from the flu," I said, taking my seat. "What's the news?" "Let's order first," my mother chided, though her eyes were sparkling with a manic sort of energy. "Champagne for everyone. Even you, Emily. You'll want to toast to this." We ordered. I barely tasted the appetizers. The tension at the table was suffocating. Henry kept checking his reflection in his spoon, preening. Finally, after the main course was cleared, my father stood up and tapped his glass. "As you know," he began, "your mother and I have been thinking about the legacy of this family. We've decided it's time to downsize. We sold the estate." I froze. The estate was the family home where we grew up. It was massive, historical, and worth a fortune. "You sold it." "For a very, very healthy sum," my father smiled, his eyes drifting to Henry. "And with that sale, we decided to settle your inheritances now, while we are still alive to see you enjoy them. We want to set you both up for the future." My heart pounded. I had been saving for a down payment on a small condo for 5 years. The market was brutal. Any help, even a small amount, would change my life. "Henry," my mother beamed, reaching across the table to squeeze my brother's hand. "We know how hard you've been trying to get your influencer brand off the ground. Image is everything in your industry, so we have purchased the penthouse suite at the Meridian for you." The air left my lungs. The Meridian. It was the newest, gaudiest skyscraper in the downtown district. A penthouse there was easily $3, maybe $4 million. "Fully paid off," my father added proudly. "A bachelor pad fit for a king. It's yours, son." "Thanks, Pop. Seriously, it's gonna be sick," Henry said, leaning back and looking at me with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Finally getting the respect I deserve, you know." I sat there stunned. a $4 million apartment for a man who had never held a job for longer than 6 months. I forced myself to breathe. "That's generous," I choked out. "And for you, Emily," my father turned to me, his tone shifting slightly. It became professional, almost pitying. "We know you are the independent one. You have your little job with the city. You've always been self-sufficient." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, folded envelope. He slid it across the white tablecloth. "We didn't want to give you cash that you might just hoard away," my mother added helpfully. "We wanted to give you something with history, something that challenges you." I opened the envelope. Inside was a deed. I recognized the plot number immediately. "The Old Creek Lot," I whispered. "It's 5 acres," my father nodded sagely. "It's been in the family for 40 years. It's a bit rustic, but land is land, Emily. It's a tangible asset." "Dad," I said, my voice trembling, "that land is a swamp. It's in the flood zone on the outskirts of the industrial district. It's literally underwater half the year. It's worth maybe $10,000, if that." "It is not a swamp," my mother snapped, offended. "It is a wetland nature retreat. It just needs vision. Henry needed a boost to get started. You, Emily, you've always been the strong one. We figured you wouldn't want a handout. We figured you'd want a project." I looked from the deed to Henry's smug face, then to my parents' expectant expressions. They honestly believed this was fair. They had given my brother a castle in the sky and given me a hole in the ground. The room seemed to spin. The nausea from my flu came rushing back, violent and sudden. I stood up, gripping the edge of the table. "You gave him a penthouse," I said, my voice shaking so hard it was barely audible. "And you gave me a mud pit." "Don't be dramatic, Emily," my father scowled. "It's unbecoming." I looked at them, really looked at them, and realized for the first time that they didn't just favor Henry. They actively despised my success because it didn't require them, and now they were punishing me for it. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. It was a surgical removal of my place in this family. I don't remember leaving the restaurant. I remember the sound of my chair scraping loudly against the floor, the hushed whispers of the other diners, and the burning sensation of tears I refused to let fall until I was safely in my car. I drove aimlessly for an hour, the heater blasting to combat the chills that were racking my body. I eventually ended up in the parking lot of my apartment complex, a drab, beige building where the elevator broke down weekly and the walls were paper-thin. I sat there in the dark, clutching the steering wheel, the deed to the Old Creek Lot sitting on the passenger seat like a cursed object. My phone buzzed. It was Maria. "I am very disappointed in your behavior tonight, Emily. Henry is hurt. You ruined his celebration. You should be happy for your brother. We expect an apology." I threw the phone onto the passenger seat. An apology. They wanted me to apologize for being disinherited in public. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't face the maps, the zoning codes, the endless bureaucracy. I felt hollowed out. But by noon, a strange, masochistic curiosity took hold of me. I needed to see it. I needed to see exactly how little they thought I was worth. I drove out to the edge of town. The paved roads gave way to gravel, and the gravel eventually turned into a muddy, rutted track. The Old Creek Lot was exactly as I remembered it from childhood family drives, where my father would point at the marsh and laugh about bad investments his grandfather had made. I stepped out of my car, my boots immediately sinking 2 inches into the gray sludge. The air smelled of stagnant water and decaying vegetation. Tall, razor-sharp reeds blocked any view, and a cloud of mosquitoes instantly formed a halo around my head. It was desolate. It was ugly. It was absolutely useless. I walked, or rather, squelched further into the property. There was an old, rotting shack near the center that looked like a stiff breeze would knock it over. This was my inheritance. This was my parents' way of saying, "We see you, and we see nothing of value." My phone rang again. This time it was Henry. "Hey, Em," he said. He sounded cheerful, completely oblivious to the devastation he was swimming in. "Look, Mom said you were freaking out. Don't be like that. The penthouse is huge, plenty of room. You can come visit." I might even let you park in my spot if you ask nicely. I'm at the lot, Henry, I said, my voice flat. Oh yeah, how is the, nature retreat? He stifled a laugh. I could hear it. I could hear the mockery he had learned at our father's knee. It's mud, Henry, it's just mud. Well, you're the smart one, right? You're the urban planner, he sneered slightly. Plan something, build a hut, grow rice, I don't know. Look, I gotta go. The interior designer is here to look at the marble for my foyer. Ciao. He hung up. I stood there in the silence of the swamp, the humiliation burning my face hotter than the fever I'd just recovered from. I looked down at the muddy water swirling around my boots. I kicked a clump of wet earth in frustration. It splashed against a rusted metal survey stake sticking out of the ground. I stared at the stake. It was old, covered in oxidation, but the cap was bright orange plastic. New, I frowned. Why was there a fresh survey marker on this godforsaken land? I wiped the mud off the cap. It bore a specific code, CTR info 24. My heart skipped a beat. My breath hitched in my throat. I worked in the planning department. I dealt with residential zoning, mostly small-scale stuff. But I knew that code. CTR stood for City Transit Rail. Infra was infrastructure. I looked around the desolate landscape with new eyes. To anyone else, to my parents, to Henry, this was just a swamp. A useless tax burden. A joke. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten that while they spent their days looking at stock tickers and Instagram feeds, I spent my life looking at the future of this city. I knew how to read the land in a way they never could. I wasn't looking at mud anymore. I was looking at a secret. To understand why the swamp felt like such a violent slap in the face, you have to understand the history of the golden child and the spare. Since Henry was born, he was the sun around which Christopher and Maria orbited. He was a colicky baby, a difficult toddler, and a disastrous student. But every failure was spun into a misunderstood genius. When he failed math, the teacher was stifling his creativity. When he got suspended for bullying, he was showing leadership potential. I, on the other hand, was the easy one. I got straight A's because I knew that was the only way to get a nod of acknowledgement. I worked through high school at a diner to pay for my own car because my father said it would build character. A character-building exercise Henry was exempt from when he was gifted a Range Rover on his 16th birthday. I put myself through college on scholarships and loans. When I graduated with honors, my parents sent a card. When Henry dropped out of his third university because the vibe was off, they threw him a welcome home gala. But the worst instance, the one that still woke me up at night, happened 3 years ago. Henry had started a business. It was some vague venture capital scheme involving cryptocurrency and luxury watches. He had convinced an elderly neighbor to invest her life savings, about $50,000. When the scheme inevitably collapsed because Henry had spent the money on trips to Ibiza, the neighbor threatened to go to the police. My parents were on vacation in the Maldives. They wouldn't answer their phones. Henry called me, sobbing, terrified of going to jail. I had just saved up $50,000. It was everything I had. It was 5 years of brown bag lunches, no vacations, and overtime. It was my freedom fund. Please, Emily, Henry had begged. I can't go to prison. I'm not built for it. They'll kill me. I paid the neighbor. I drained my account to zero to save him. When my parents returned and found out, Christopher didn't thank me. He looked at me over the top of his reading glasses and said, "Well, Emily, that was the responsible thing to do. You're the stable one. Henry is a visionary. He takes risks. Sometimes risks don't pay off. It's the family's duty to absorb the shock." They never paid me back. They bought Henry a new condo to help him get back on his feet after the trauma of his failure. That was the dynamic. I was the safety net. Henry was the trapeze artist. And now, the antagonists of my life, my own parents, had finalized the arrangement. 2 days after the dinner, I went to my parents' rental home. They were staying in a luxury villa while they waited for their own new penthouse, smaller than Henry's, but still opulent, to be ready. I found them on the patio. Christopher was on the phone, his voice booming with that specific, unearned confidence that made my skin crawl. "Yes, well, we felt it was time to liquidate," he was saying. "The boy needs a proper start. The girl, Oh, she's fine. She's got a project, keeps her busy. He hung up and turned to me, his smile not reaching his eyes. Emily, to what do we owe the pleasure? Come to thank us for the land. Maria looked up from her magazine. She looked impeccable, preserved in amber and Botox. You look terrible, darling. Are you still sulking? It's very unbecoming. I'm not sulking, I lied, keeping my face perfectly neutral. I just wanted to clarify something. The deed, it's fully in my name, no trusts, no caveats. It is yours entirely, Christopher said, waving a hand dismissively. Fee simple absolute, do whatever you want with it. Sell it though you won't get much. Build a shack, it's your problem now. And Henry's penthouse, I asked, is that fully in his name? Of course, Maria said, her eyes lighting up. We wanted him to have the asset. It strengthens his portfolio. Why, are you jealous again? No, I said quietly. Just curious about the distribution of assets. Christopher laughed, a dry, barking sound. Emily, stop counting other people's money, it's vulgar. We gave Henry the penthouse because he represents the family name in the social sphere. Well, you're a bureaucrat. You don't need a penthouse to stamp permits. You need to learn that not everyone gets a trophy just for participating. He stood up, walking over to pour himself a drink, turning his back to me. It was a power move he had used my whole life. The conversation was over because he decided it was. Besides, he threw over his shoulder, that land has potential. If you were half as smart as you think you are, you'd figure out how to drain it. Consider it a test. A test, I repeated. Exactly, Maria chimed in. Henry is already planning a housewarming party, a masquerade. You should come, but try to look a bit more alive. I looked at them, the casual cruelty, the absolute certainty that they were the masters of the universe, and I was just a supporting character in the movie of their lives. They had no idea what I had seen on that orange survey stake. They had no idea that their test was about to become their reckoning. Okay, I said, a small, cold smile touching my lips for the first time in days. I'll come to the party. I wouldn't miss it for the world. I turned and walked away. As I reached the door, I heard my father mutter to my mother, "She'll never do anything with that swamp. She lacks the killer instinct." I closed the door softly behind me. He was right about one thing. I didn't have a killer instinct. I had something better. I had the zoning maps. The morning after the confrontation at my parents' rental, I walked into the city planning department with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. Usually, the fluorescent lights and the hum of servers felt draining, but today, they felt like the control center of my own private war room. I sat at my desk, logged into the secure internal server, and pulled up the master file for the East River redevelopment zone. My heart hammered against my ribs. The file was massive. It detailed a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project, the new high-speed rail connector hub. The city had been quietly acquiring land for years, piecing together the corridor needed for the tracks and the massive station complex. But there was a gap. A critical, missing piece in the puzzle right where the main terminal was supposed to go. I zoomed in on the map. There, outlined in red, was Parcel 404B, the Old Creek lot. My worthless swamp. My hands shook as I opened the acquisition notes. The city had been trying to negotiate with the previous owners, my grandfather, then my father for a decade, but Christopher, in his arrogance, had ignored every letter, assuming they were lowball offers for useless land. He had never bothered to open the official city correspondence, likely tossing it in the trash with the junk mail. The city was desperate. The project was already greenlit, funding secured, and contractors hired. Without Parcel 404B, the entire alignment would fail. They needed my land, and they needed it yesterday. And because the project was under an eminent domain avoidance mandate to speed up the process, they were authorized to pay a massive premium, to avoid a court battle. I pulled up the latest appraisal. The mud pit was valued at $4.2 million as a base price, with a discretionary budget of up to $6 million for expedited acquisition. I sat back, staring at the number, $6 million. My parents had handed me a winning lottery ticket and called it trash. But that was only half the equation. I needed to check on Henry's prize. I typed in the address for the Meridian. It was a glittering needle of glass and steel downtown, marketed as the pinnacle of luxury. I accessed the building and safety records, specifically the inspection reports that hadn't been made public yet. The file for the Meridian was flagged with a yellow warning icon. I clicked it. Structural deficiency report. Sector C was the penthouse levels. I read through the technical jargon. Substandard load-bearing concrete in upper tier. Significant settling detected. Immediate remediation required. Then, I saw the bombshell. A certificate of occupancy had been issued conditionally, but a new engineering report filed just 2 days ago recommended revoking it. The developer was bankrupt and hiding the defects. The Homeowners Association was about to be hit with a special assessment to fix the foundation, a cost estimated at $500,000 per unit, with the penthouse bearing the brunt of the cost due to the roof access liabilities. My brother's $4 million penthouse was a ticking time bomb of debt and litigation. And because Christopher and Maria had bought it, as is, to get a quick deal, they had waived the standard inspection contingencies. I printed both documents, the offer letter for my land and the structural condemnation warning for Henry's building. I didn't go to a lawyer yet. I went to a surveyor I knew, a grizzled old man named Elias who owed me a favor. "Elias," I said, meeting him for coffee, "I need you to officially survey the Old Creek lot. I need the boundaries marked down to the inch." "That swamp," Elias laughed, stirring his espresso. "Emily, why you selling it for parts?" "Something like that," I smiled, a tight, secretive smile. "Just do it, and date it for today." He did. By Friday, I had the official survey. By Monday, I had a meeting with the director of city acquisitions. When I walked into his office, he looked relieved. "Ms. Emily," he said, wiping sweat from his brow, "we were afraid we'd have to sue your family. We've been trying to reach your father for months." "My father doesn't own it anymore," I said, sliding the deed across his desk. "I do, and I'm ready to sell." "Excellent," he beamed. "We can offer the standard." "No," I interrupted, my voice steady. "I know the timeline. I know the contractors are already mobilized and charging you daily delay penalties. I want the expedited cap, $6.5 million, and I want the check in 10 days. He looked at me, stunned. Then he looked at the clock on his wall. He knew I was right. "Done," he sighed. I walked out of that office with a signed contract for $6.5 million. I was rich, I was free, and my family had absolutely no idea. The housewarming masquerade at Henry's penthouse was as pretentious as I expected. The elevator opened directly into the foyer, which was draped in black velvet. A DJ was blasting house music that rattled the floor-to-ceiling windows. Waiters circulated with trays of caviar and champagne. I arrived late, wearing a simple red dress and a plain black mask. I saw my parents holding court near the balcony, laughing loudly with a group of Henry's investor friends. Henry was in the center, wearing a gold mask that looked ridiculous, gesturing wildly with a cigar. "Emily," my mother cried out when she saw me. She scanned my outfit with a critical eye. "Well, at least you wore red, trying to be bold." "Something like that," I said, taking a glass of champagne. "Have you seen the view?" Christopher boasted, sweeping his arm toward the city skyline. "Top of the world, Emily. This is what success looks like. This is what legacy buys." "It's certainly high up," I said, glancing at the ceiling. I noticed a hairline crack running along the crown molding, subtle but there. The structural settling had already started. "So?" Henry sauntered over, draping an arm around my shoulder. "How's the swamp? Catch any gators lately?" His friends laughed, my parents smirked. "Actually," I said, stepping out from under his arm, "the swamp is doing great. In fact, I sold it." The laughter died instantly. "You what?" Christopher frowned. "Sold it, to who? Some conservation group for a tax write-off." "No," I said, keeping my voice calm but raising it just enough to be heard over the music. "To the city, for the high-speed rail project." Christopher's face went blank. The rail project, that route was supposed to go through the industrial park. Changes happen, I shrugged. They needed the land urgently. I just signed the closing papers. How much? Maria asked sharply, her eyes narrowed. Did you get a fair price? 100,000. I took a slow sip of my drink. 6.5 million. The silence that followed was louder than the music. Henry dropped his cigar. It rolled across the expensive hardwood floor, leaving a trail of ash. 6 million, Henry stammered. That's a lie, you're lying. It's public record as of this morning, I said. You can check the city website. But we gave you that land. My father sputtered, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. We gave it to you. That money, that is family money. No, I corrected him. You gave me a gift. A lesson in independence, you called it. I learned the lesson. I capitalized on my asset. You tricked us. Maria shrieked, her poise shattering. You knew, you work for the city. You knew that land was valuable and you let us give it to you. I didn't let you do anything, I said coldly. You chose to give Henry the penthouse because you thought it was the prize. You chose to give me the swamp because you thought it was a punishment. You gambled on your favorite child, and you lost. It doesn't matter, Henry sneered, trying to recover his composure. I still have this place. This place is worth 4 million. I'm still winning. I looked at him with genuine pity. Actually, Henry, I said, reaching into my purse. About that. I pulled out the second document, the structural deficiency report. I pulled the building records, I said, handing it to him. You might want to read the section on imminent condemnation. The developers hid the foundation cracks. The city is revoking the occupancy permit next week. This building isn't worth 4 million. It's a liability. Henry snatched the paper. As he read, his face went pale. What is this? He whispered. What is this, Emily? It means, I said, that your penthouse is about to be legally uninhabitable. And since Mom and Dad waived the inspection to get the deal done quickly, you're stuck with it. The party ended abruptly. The guests, sensing the nuclear tension radiating from our family, filtered out in awkward silence. We were left alone in the vast, echoing living room. The view of the city lights, once a symbol of triumph, now felt like a mocking backdrop to a disaster. You did this, my father hissed, pacing the floor. You sabotaged us. I didn't build the faulty foundation, Dad, I said, sitting on one of Henry's white leather sofas. And I didn't plan the rail line. I just paid attention, something you never did with me. We can fix this, Maria said, her hands trembling as she poured herself a stiff drink. We can sue the developers. They're bankrupt, I pointed out. The LLC that built this place dissolved yesterday. There's no one to sue. Then we sell, Henry yelled. We sell it right now to some other idiot. You can't, I said. I flagged the file in the city system. The condemnation notice is active. No title company will ensure the sale. You are trapped, Henry. My father stopped pacing. He turned to me, his expression shifting from anger to a chilling, predatory calculation. Well, he said, smoothing his tie, it's a good thing we're a family then. We stick together. What do you mean? I asked, though I knew exactly what was coming. The 6 million, he said smoothly. That's a windfall. It's more than enough to cover the repairs on this place, pay the legal fees, and get Henry set up in a new spot. We'll pool the resources. I stared at him. The audacity was breathtaking. Pool the resources. I repeated. Yes, Maria nodded eagerly, latching onto the idea. Emily, you have to help your brother. It's not fair that he loses everything while you profit. We're a team. A team? I laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. When I needed help 3 years ago, when I gave Henry my life savings, you told me it was a character-building exercise. Where was the team then? That was different, Henry whined. This is millions of dollars, Emily. You can't just keep it. Watch me, I said. You ungrateful little, my father lunged forward but stopped himself. He took a breath. Emily, look, be reasonable. If you don't help us, Henry will be ruined. We put all our liquidity into this place. We're We're leveraged. That was the final piece of the puzzle. They weren't just favoring Henry, they were broke. They had spent their retirement on appearances, and this penthouse was their last big play. You're broke, I realized aloud. We have assets. My father blustered. But liquidity is tight. We need the cash injection. Now. No, I said. Excuse me. Maria gasped. No, I said again, standing up. I'm not giving you a dime, not for the repairs, not for a new apartment, not for a lawyer. You can't do that. Henry screamed, his face red and blotchy. I'm your brother. And I'm the sister you laughed at, I said. I'm the sister you mocked for working a boring city job. Well, my boring job just made me rich, and your exciting life just made you homeless. If you walk out that door without writing a check, my father said, his voice low and threatening, you are no longer our daughter. We will cut you off completely. You already did, I said. You cut me off when you gave me a swamp. You just didn't realize you were cutting me off with a gold mine. I walked toward the elevator. Emily, my mother screamed, don't you dare walk away from us. I pressed the button, the doors slid open. I stepped inside and looked back at them, 3 people in expensive clothes, standing in a crumbling castle, terrified of the real world. Goodbye, I said. The doors closed, but the war wasn't over. As I walked out of the building, my phone started blowing up. Messages from extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins. Emily, how could you do this to your parents? Henry says you stole his inheritance. Your mother is in the hospital with stress. Fix this. They had launched a smear campaign. They were trying to shame me into submission. They were trying to turn the entire family against me. I sat in my car and looked at the barrage of hate. I could have blocked them. I could have run away. But I was an urban planner. I knew how to deal with structural rot. You didn't paint over it. You exposed it to the light and then you demolished it. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to the family reunion next weekend, and I was bringing receipts. The family reunion was an annual tradition held at my Aunt Clara's massive countryside property. It was usually a stiff affair of polite conversation and potato salad, but this year, the tension was palpable from the moment I parked my car. I could feel the stares. My cousins whispered behind their hands. My aunts glared at me over their iced tea. Christopher and Maria had clearly been busy. They had painted a masterpiece of victimhood. Their ungrateful, greedy daughter had swindled them out of their retirement and left her poor, sick brother homeless. I walked toward the main tent, clutching a thick manila folder. My stomach was churning, but my resolve was harder than concrete. Well, if it isn't the prodigal daughter, Aunt Clara sniffed as I approached the buffet table. We heard about what you did. Shameful, absolutely shameful. Hello, Aunt Clara, I said calmly. Nice to see you too. Don't pretend, Uncle George, a blustery man who had always favored Henry, stepped in. Your parents are devastated. Henry is practically destitute because of your little stunt with the city. Is that what they told you? I asked, my voice carrying just enough to draw the attention of the nearby tables. They told us everything, George spat. How you manipulated the sale. How you knew the land was worth millions and let them give it to you for nothing. That money belongs to the family trust, Emily, not your personal bank account. Actually, I said, raising my voice so the entire gathering could hear. That money belongs to the person whose name is on the deed, and that name is mine. Christopher and Maria emerged from the crowd, looking like tragic heroes. Maria was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Henry was by their side, looking sullen and defeated, playing the part of the wounded prince perfectly. Emily, my father said, his voice trembling with practiced sorrow, please, don't make a scene. We just want what's fair. We want to be a family again. Just sign the papers to transfer the funds into the trust, and we can put this behind us. The trust, I repeated. The trust that you control. The trust that paid for Henry's failed businesses. The trust that bought a penthouse in a condemned building. It was an investment, Henry shouted. A bad investment doesn't make me a criminal. No, I said, opening my folder, but fraud does. I pulled out a stack of papers. The chatter died instantly. I did a little more digging, I announced to the silent crowd. It turns out the bad investment wasn't just bad luck, it was deliberate. I held up a document. This is a transfer record. 2 months ago, Mom and Dad moved the entirety of their liquid savings, over $2 million, into an offshore account under Henry's name. They did this right before they claimed to be broke to buy the penthouse. I held up another paper. And this is an email chain between Dad and the developer of the Meridian. He knew about the structural issues. He bought the unit at a massive discount, 50 cents on the dollar, hoping to flip it to an unsuspecting buyer before the condemnation notice went public. He was going to defraud someone. He just didn't expect the city inspector to catch it this fast. Gasps rippled through the tent, my father's face drained of color. That's privileged information. He stammered. Where did you get that? Public records request, I said simply. You sent those emails from your old work account, Dad. The one that's archived on the server I have access to as a city employee. It's all public record if you know where to look. I turned to the family. They didn't just favor Henry. They tried to use him to launder money and commit real estate fraud. And when it blew up in their faces, they came after my legitimate earnings to cover their tracks. Lies, Maria shrieked, her facade crumbling completely. She's jealous. She's always been jealous. Am I asked, pulling out one final document. This is a copy of the check I wrote to save Henry from prison 3 years ago. $50,000. My life savings. I never asked for it back. I never told anyone until now. Does that sound like jealousy? Or does it sound like someone who was tired of cleaning up your messes? I tossed the copies onto the table in front of Aunt Clara. Read them, I said. Read the dates, read the amounts, and then tell me who the real thief is. Aunt Clara picked up the papers. Uncle George leaned over her shoulder. The silence was deafening as they read. Slowly, heads turned toward Christopher and Maria. The looks of sympathy were replaced by shock and disgust. Christopher, Uncle George said slowly, is this true? Did you try to flip a condemned building? It was a business strategy. My father sputtered. It's complicated. It's illegal, I said, and I'm done paying for it. I looked at Henry. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at his shoes, realizing that his safety net had just been incinerated. I'm leaving, I said. I'm going to enjoy my life, my independent life. Don't call me, don't text me, and definitely don't ask for a loan. I turned and walked away. Behind me, the eruption of questions and accusations began. I heard my mother sobbing for real this time. I heard my father shouting excuses. But for the first time in my life, their noise didn't reach me. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove out of the estate. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the fields. I didn't look back. 6 months later, the dust had finally settled. The fallout was spectacular. The family trust dissolved under the weight of legal fees. Christopher and Maria were forced to sell their remaining assets to cover the lawsuits from the attempted fraud at the Meridian. They moved into a small, rented condo on the outskirts of town, ironically, not far from where my swamp used to be. Henry, for the first time in his life, had to get a job, a real job. I heard through the grapevine that he was working at a car dealership detailing vehicles. No more influencers, no more penthouses, just minimum wage and a lot of humble pie. As for me, I didn't quit my job. I loved being an urban planner. I loved seeing how a city breathed and grew, but I did make some changes. I bought a beautiful, historic brownstone in the city, fully inspected, of course. I set up a scholarship fund for students in urban design who came from low-income backgrounds, and I took a long, luxurious vacation to Italy, something I had dreamed of since college. I was sitting in a cafe in Florence, sipping an espresso and watching the people go by when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Emily. Please, we miss you. Mom is not doing well. Can we just talk? Henry. I looked at the message. I thought about the boy I had protected. I thought about the brother who had mocked me. I thought about the parents who had tried to steal my future. I felt a pang of sadness, a ghost of the old obligation. But then I looked up at the Duomo, golden in the afternoon light. I took a deep breath of the warm Italian air. I realized I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their love because their love was conditional. It was a transaction and I was no longer buying. I deleted the message. Then I blocked the number. I paid for my coffee, left a generous tip, and walked out into the piazza. The cobblestones were uneven, ancient, and real, just like my life. My parents had tried to bury me in the mud. They forgot that I was a seed, and now, finally, I was blooming.